just want to welcome you all and just say how lovely it is to see those of you who are able to join us this evening. My name's Helen. I'm one of the owners of Brilliant Beginnings, as well as NGA Law, along with the wonderful Natalie Gamble. And, you know, it's been a while since we've had the privilege of focusing on US surrogacy. And we are just really excited that, you know, we are able to, you know, be here tonight, as well as with some of our wonderful friends in the US at last, across the pond. And really, you know, one of the huge reasons why we love doing this kind of event is because it brings together not just the pieces of the puzzle for people who might be thinking about surrogacy in the US, but it also brings, you know, the people together. And ultimately, you know, that's what this is all about. It's about us being able to get together as professionals, as well as people who are so incredibly passionate about surrogacy and enabling surrogacy around the world. You know, we are incredibly lucky that we've managed to gather a group of people together who, you know, not only have their own personal experience, but really have extraordinarily exceptional experience in their field. And this is an opportunity for us to share all of our hints and tips, as well as some of the practicalities and legalities around surrogacy. And finally, I just want to say thank you ever so much to you all for giving us this hour. And we look forward to hopefully what will be a really helpful and informative hour or so. So I'm not going to talk anymore, except to just introduce you to our speakers. And this evening, we're going to start off with the wonderful Laura Clarke. Laura has lived experience as a 3-time UK surrogate. And she's also one of our client managers who supports intended parents who are going to the US. And within that, she is also a nurse. We'll move on then to Dr. Gad Lavy, who joins us from Connecticut in Stamford, and his experience pans over 30 years. There isn't really much Dr. Lavy doesn't know about surrogacy and fertility. And then we'll move on to the UK legal process. Heidi always says this is a boring bit, but I can tell you during COVID, it was nothing but, you know, incredible stuff that the team at NGA Law were doing. And then last but not least, we're joined by Alyssa Martin, who also is in the States at the moment, but has some exceptional experience, not just as a client manager at Brilliant Beginnings and a surrogate manager, but also as an experienced surrogate based in the US, and then a surrogate based here in the UK. So she's got some wonderful experience to share with us. So let's start with Laura. Laura joins us from, where are you? Near Milton?
Yeah, I'm in Northamptonshire.
In Northamptonshire. And as I said, Laura is a trained nurse and has been a surrogate 3 times, but delivered twins, followed by 2 singletons. Now offers her experience with us at Brilliant Beginnings, supporting teams here in the UK, but also project managing those who go to the US. And Laura's going to talk to us a little bit about the US pathway and all the things that you need to think about. Thanks, Laura.
Thanks, Helen. Appreciate that. So, yeah, so my job tonight is to talk to you all about how we at Brilliant Beginnings can help navigate your US journey. So the positives about surrogacy in the US is that it's a very well-established destination, and there is lots of choice, be that within the availability of egg donors is really good, and the level of information that you receive about your donors in the US is much greater than what you'd get here in the UK. The time frame to be matched with a surrogate in the US is on average much shorter than what it is here in the UK. And the robust legal framework that they have in place ensures everyone is very well protected and second to none, really. So the pandemic that we've all been living through over the past year or so has seen everything kind of slow down in life and the world in general, I guess. But we have seen that kind of slow down the US journeys as well. However, we have continued to work with all of our US partners to find ways to ensure that we can continue on and ensure US surrogacy journeys can still happen. We've worked ways around being able to, make sure journeys continue on. We've worked around getting sperm shipped across to the US due to travel restrictions. Before all of this kicked off, it would be that the intended parents would travel to visit the clinic in the US and deposit their sperm there to get the ball rolling. Where now there's a tried and tested route of shipping the sperm across to the US from the UK without that need to travel. There are people still that obviously prefer that face-to-face, so hopefully, all being well, with the easing of travel restrictions sometime soon, that might mean that people are again able to travel to pick up on potentially paused journeys within the US to be able to kind of get that ball rolling again. So how can we help you here at Bringing Beginnings? So we have a new US pathway that offers an end-to-end service incorporating the practical aspects of surrogacy along with the legal aspects of surrogacy as well. How that works is from the client manager perspective, we really work together with you, getting to know you as intended parents as much as possible, what you want from your journey. We'll work with you to identify three main things, and that the first being your agency. That is the agency that will ultimately find and match a surrogate for you and or your egg donor. Then it's the clinic, and they will see you through and provide all of your treatments through creating embryos and treatment with your surrogate as well. And then you'll need attorney support in the US, and they will help you draw up all of the legal agreements for you on the US side with regards to your egg donor, if needed, and also your surrogate too. So alongside that, the support that we give you on the Bringing Beginnings side, as part of the new US pathway, you'll also have a legal manager from the NGA law team, and they will be on hand for you to support all the way throughout your journey, helping you with things like your parental order here on the UK side, and then returning home to the UK with your baby. Lots of, there's really quite important factors when you are thinking about your partner choices. So apart from things like looking at, the reputation and success rates of clinics, knowing what experience they have of working with one another and together as teams is really quite key. So as I've said previously, the choice is quite vast in the US, given that it's a really tried and tested place to be for surrogacy. But, they all have lots of experience of working with international intended parents, especially and in particular UK clients, really. Each organisation that you ultimately decide to work with needs to reflect the way you like to work as well. So in getting to know you a bit more as people and as parents going on this journey, we are able to identify those organisations that we feel will fit in with the way that you like to work. So there'll be some that have a more transactional feel, just naturally, and that there'll be some that are more homespun. So it really is a long journey. So it really is so important to get that feel right for you. You have to be comfortable with their style and their approach. So we will help you with those introductions, set up those calls, and you can get a feel for those people before you kind of settle on your choices and then move forward. So one of the big questions that we always get asked in terms of time frame is, okay, so we're starting this journey today. How long is it going to take us to have our child at home? So from experience, we would say you should really anticipate your surrogacy journey to be around about 18 to 24 months from getting things going from this end to bringing your baby home. Within that, it can be a bit of a roller coaster journey. That will kind of, depend on how many transfers that need to happen, and always having a little bit of luck on your side really helps with that too. So always a hot topic as well is how long's the wait for a surrogate, and what do the match times look like? And to be matched with a surrogate in the US can vary. Could be anywhere between a few weeks to 8 to 9 months, let's say. And that will really depend on the agency's ability to recruit surrogates, as well as the criteria that you as people are looking for within a surrogate. At the moment, we're hearing from all of our US agencies that there has been a bit of a slowdown during the pandemic with surrogate recruitment. I think that is kind of just widespread generally. What that means in real terms is typical match times last year, we were looking at around about 3 to 4 months wait time to be matched with a surrogate, where in some instances at the moment we're hearing approximately 6 to 9 months. But that always comes with a caveat of it's not an exact science, and the wait could be shorter and it could be longer depending on your criteria really at the outset. So things like budget is always another big topic. What is this all going to cost if you decide to go on a US journey from here in the UK? And we'd always kind of say to our intended parents that a sensible starting budget, allowing for a bit of leeway, would be around £170,000. This could well increase in costs upwards of £220,000, for example, if you were to conceive twins. Healthcare costs in the US are quite high, and if you conceive twins, costs for your newborns could be quite hefty if that wasn't a planned scenario. So always something just to be mindful of and have a little a just in case pot handy if possible. Within that budget, there are a number of variables. So that budget will include things like agency fees for your surrogate and your egg donor. It would include your surrogate compensation and her expenses, egg donor compensation. Within that are your clinic costs, so creating embryos and help through treatment for your surrogate and getting pregnant. Then there would be the US legal costs in drawing up the agreements and contracts in the US. And within that is the UK legal costs as well, in order to help and get support with your parental order when you bring baby home. Insurances is quite a big thing in the US, obviously. Definitely something to plan for, and you would need insurance for your surrogate and your newborns. And then travel accommodation as well. Within that, obviously the exchange rate fluctuates, so that is also something that you should be mindful of, and will kind of obviously bear in mind in terms of costs and things as well. So yeah, that's us from the Brilliant Beginning side, in a bit of a nutshell. And so yeah, Helen, back to you.
Wonderful, thank you, Laura. If there's any questions about any of that in the pathway, any key questions around timings or logistics, then pop them in the chat box and we'll pick them up at the end. But I'd like to move on now to Dr. Gad Lavy, who, as I said, runs the New England Fertility Institute, which was and is the first non-hospital-based outpatient IVF center in Stamford, Connecticut. The Institute has been around for over 30 years now, and I think what I understand is that, Dr. Lavy, you can correct me, but there has been over 10,000 babies as a result of your work and your team's work, which is really quite extraordinary. So there can't be much you haven't seen, and there can't be much that you haven't navigated through, and notwithstanding this most recent pandemic. Dr. Lavy is board certified in obstetrics and gynecology and reproductive endocrinology. He's also a medical staff member at the Department of OB/GYN at Stamford Hospital, and a member of the American Society for Reproductive Medicine and the Society of Reproductive Surgeons. And in his spare time has served as an assistant professor in the Division of Reproductive Endocrinology at the world-renowned Yale, and served as director of the program for assisted reproduction. So I'm not going to say anything else because we need to hear from you, please, Dr. Lavy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Helen, for the introduction. And thank you for having me, and thank all of you for being here. And as you can imagine, it's basically an impossible task to tell you about the process in 10 minutes. What I'd like to do is maybe I'm going to use a couple of slides, and I'll tell you a little bit about myself and the clinic, and just give you sort of a taste of what the whole process looks like. And as Helen mentioned, I started my career at a university. I was at Yale for about 10 years. And, without aging myself, I should say that, I was sort of there almost at the conception of IVF, at least in the US. And, IVF is sort of the center of this egg donation surrogacy process, because that's basically what brings it all together. And we've seen over the years a tremendous improvement in the process. It's both easier and also much more successful than it used to be. And from the very beginning, when I left the university, I was very interested, very passionate about what we call third-party reproduction, which is essentially egg donation and surrogacy. And my clinic is, once we started and established ourselves, we started to focus more and more on these two areas. So I would say that in the last 5 to 10 years, we're focusing mostly, almost exclusively, on egg donation and surrogacy. And even though the process is basically a variation on the theme of IVF, it is a little bit different. And it's different in the sense that there's more moving parts. There's different regulations that control this in the US. And that sort of, and we created the infrastructure to support all of that. So as Laura said in her very, very fine introduction, you basically need a team. And we work collaboratively with the agencies, and of course, Brilliant Beginning and their team are going to basically oversee the entire process for you in the US. And as far as being focused on this particular area, we essentially work not just locally and not just nationally, but also internationally. We work, of course, with various agencies because, as Laura said, and to do the process in the US, you need to work with a surrogacy agency. And again, because the US has become, in a way, a destination for surrogacy, it can be a little bit confusing and overwhelming if you start sort of searching yourselves. For example, there's over 200 surrogacy agencies, and each one of them is a little bit different. So having someone to help you navigate, I think it's a huge advantage. And of course, being in this area, we work with basically a diversity of different clients. We work with heterosexual couples, same-sex couple, single men, single women. So in the US really doesn't restrict access to this process the way it's done in some of the countries in Europe. And I've had experience with surrogacy in pretty much everywhere, in India and Thailand and Nepal and Ukraine and Georgia. And again, at the end, right now we're focused mostly here, just because the process is simpler, it's legal, and everything's done above board. And I think it's also very safe because, we know the surrogates, you have a connection with the surrogate, the standard of living and, the connection is really helpful to make you comfortable in the process. This is, I'm just showing you Shantae, who is actually director of our egg donor program. And she is sort of my right-hand person in this process. And she will help you basically welcome you into the practice and make sure that you get the attention that you need. So I focus very much from the very, very beginning on the emotional aspects of the process, because it's a very, I think for most people, it's a difficult process. Again, everyone is different, everyone has different needs. So what we do once you come in, we will actually assign one person to be your, call them coordinators or case manager, to basically guide you through the entire process. And the thing about, again, I mentioned about the technology, and that IVF has come a long way. And the way we do the process, which I'll show you in just a minute, allows us basically to get high rates of success with only one embryo. Because again, we always worry, Laura mentioned that, we worried about the risk of multiples, even twins. So of course, we want to have a healthy baby, and the best way to do that is just to have one, or one at a time. And in the past, in the earlier days of IVF, because the success was lower, we actually would put back multiple embryos in order to get decent success, and that's changed. So we can comfortably transfer one embryo and expect a high rate of success. So I'll just show you the process, and I think this is basically very important for you to understand. And I always worry, when you give too much information and too many details, for some people it's a little bit intimidating, a little bit overwhelming. But I really believe that you need to understand how the whole thing works, and then we will worry about the details. And again, I'm sure in the audience today, there's different people with different needs. So some people need basically just a surrogate, and some people may only need an egg donor, and some people need both. So I'm showing you a scenario where we're using an egg donor and a surrogate. And again, we'll talk about the sperm cells in a minute, but obviously at the end, we're talking about the sperm, we're talking about the egg, and we're talking about the uterus. So, and this is what the IVF process looks like when we do it with surrogates. And we do the process basically in two parts, and these parts are completely separate. Usually we end up creating the embryos and freezing them before we have a surrogate. So we start with the embryo creation. And if you need an egg donor, our clinic we have our own pool of egg donors, and we will help you find a donor. but you're certainly not limited to using our donors. So once we find the egg donor and we figure out the sperm, so either we're using a sperm donor or a partner sperm. Laura mentioned the fact that nowadays we actually, most of the time for couples that are not in the US, we ship the sperm in. And the process is actually very simple and very safe. So we're not really compromising. But of course, anyone who wants to come and visit the clinic is more than welcome. So we arrange for the egg donor, we arrange for the sperm, and we start the process. And then after 2 weeks of medication, the egg donor has her egg retrieval. And then we take the eggs and we make the embryos. And then once we start working on the embryos, of course, we want to try and identify the embryo that will give us the highest chance of success. And we do two things to that end. One is the fact that we can grow the embryos now in the laboratory for 5 or 6 days until it reaches what's called the Blastocyst stage. And again, this is a relatively new development improvement in IVF because we're able to provide the conditions that the embryo requires. And then, so we of course lose some embryos along the way, but those embryos that do make it to that stage are stronger, more viable, and have a better chance. The second thing we do is we take those blastocysts and put them through a genetic testing. And the genetic testing basically allows us to further identify those embryos that are genetically normal, more viable, higher success. And at the end, of course, once all this is done, the embryo is frozen. The freezing technology has improved to a point where it doesn't really make a difference whether the embryo is fresh or frozen. And then the embryo stays frozen until we have the surrogate. And by the way, when we do the genetic testing, of course, we're counting the chromosomes, and then we can also identify the gender. And in the US, there's no issue with selecting the gender of the baby, if you want. And then usually a few months later, and I think Laura was pretty much on target as far as how long it takes. But some agencies are a little bit quicker, but I'd say 4 months, 6 months, sometimes 8 months is sort of the average. And then once there is a surrogate, we basically make sure that she is good, meaning that she's healthy and she passed all the testing. Then we make sure there is a solid legal agreement, legal contract with her, between you and her. And then we start preparing her for the transfer. So once the surrogate is ready to move forward, it takes about a month to get her ready and then do what's called the embryo transfer. As I said, we usually transfer a single embryo. As you can see in the little chart on the bottom, we expect about 70 to 80% success with one embryo. It says there are no twins. It's of course possible that the embryo splits, but it's very unusual. The number below is the chances of success with 2 embryos. Of course, it's higher, but there's also a high probability of twins. And as I said, we worry about the complications. So basically, it takes 1 month to create the embryos and freeze them, and it takes 1 month to prepare the surrogate and transfer the embryo and find out if she's pregnant. And the rest of it is just getting everything lined up, getting the sperm, finding the egg donor, finding the surrogate, the contract, and so forth. So again, I'm not going to get into this because I can definitely spend at least another hour or more. So I think I'm going to stop here, and I'll be more than happy to answer any of your questions. The way we usually work is when you're ready, or if you'd like to get more information, I'm more than happy to have a Zoom consultation with you. And we take about an hour, and I basically get to know you a little bit more and what you want and what you need, and tell you what the options are. And then, if we move forward, we can help you again with the sperm. We can help you with the egg donor. And then we, working with Helen and her company, we help you find the right surrogate. So I think I'm going to stop here, and I'd be more than happy to answer more questions.
Wonderful. Thank you. We'll certainly have questions at the end. There's a few that are coming in now, so we'll just making a note of those as they come in. Thank you, Dr. Levy. Let's move on to Heidi. Heidi is one of our amazing paralegals at NGA Law. And I can't tell you the juggling and navigation, as well as legal expertise that Heidi has lived through as a result of the pandemic, and was really intrinsic with our efforts to get intended parents out to the States, as well as help them navigate back during the pandemic. And I remember one particular event where the wildfires were happening, and we had a couple with a newborn baby in Vegas, and Heidi was certainly on the phone to them at all hours of the day. So Heidi has got enormous experience in assisting intended parents, both in the way that they set up their legal process with a surrogate in the US, working in tandem with the attorneys in the US, but also supporting intended parents when they come home, both bringing their baby back, but also once they get back and applying for the parental order. Heidi is going to explore just a little bit about what that looks like. Thank you, Heidi.
Thanks, Helen. I'm not sure why you bring up the wildfires. That was a crazy time that I hope will not be repeated for anybody. But apart from that, thank you for the introduction. Hi everyone. It's really nice to speak to you, although I can't see you, about the UK legal side of a US surrogacy. So just to kind of zoom out a little bit at my role at NGA, I have the pleasure of mostly working on international surrogacy cases and domestic also, but pretty much surrogacy all day, every day. At NGA Law, we work with all sorts of families, really all over the world. But I do have a bit of a soft spot for the Brilliant Beginnings clients. And I can see a couple of my colleagues and my team on this Zoom, and it's no secret that I love working with the US Brilliant Beginnings clients more than anyone, purely because, if I'm honest, it's the easiest and the most straightforward work that I'll do, because it's set up in such a way that really just makes everything quite great and quite straightforward. So hopefully I'll be able to kind of demonstrate that to you today, why I like doing them, and that will make sense. So there's three key areas that I want everyone to kind of go away having clear in their minds. So firstly, I want to look at kind of a little overview of the surrogacy US framework and sort of how that will affect you as UK intended parents. Secondly, probably the thing that I get asked most is how to get home from the US after your child is born. And then thirdly, as Helen mentioned, we're going to talk about the parental order and dive into some detail about exactly what that is, the criteria, and how you apply, etc. So hope that all sounds okay. So to start off with, thinking about the US legal framework, Laura mentioned about shipping sperm, and we really lobbied the HFEA, who are the regulatory body that look after all UK fertility clinics, to clarify their guidance to allow this actually to happen in a much more straightforward way. So that's big tick number one, and one less thing to worry about, that if you aren't able to get to the US for whatever reason, a pandemic or no pandemic, it is possible to kind of kickstart things in the UK. So you will need a US attorney, and sometimes this is provided in-house with your surrogacy agency, or sometimes it's elsewhere. And they're going to help you put in place your surrogacy agreement, as Dr. Lavy has already told us about. There are no federal surrogacy laws in the US, so it does vary state by state, but in all states there is some kind of like parental registration process that importantly means that when your child is born, you will be the legal parent, and you will be on the US birth certificate, which is simply fantastic. You know, sometimes it involves a court application, sometimes it doesn't, and that is something that your US attorney will help you with. So that's a very brief overview of kind of what to expect from the US side. So moving on to the second stuff that I wanted to talk about, which was sort of how to get home. So I hope this will be a sigh of relief for most people, that any child born in the US is born an American citizen, which means that they're entitled to a US passport. And that is typically what we see that the quickest way for UK parents to return to the UK is by applying for that US passport and then traveling back on that with the US passport for your child. You just need the US birth certificate in order to kickstart that process. And hopefully that should be as straightforward as process. So that's a nice and easy one to answer. I'm going to move on. If there are any other questions, I'm happy to pick them up later. But I want to kind of really take some time to pick apart the parental order, which I think a lot of people, when they're approaching surrogacy, might hear this term thrown around quite a bit. I have quite a few people coming at me with their different interpretations of what it is. So let's kind of break this down. So regardless of the US law and the fact that in the US, you're likely to already be considered the legal parent to your child, and you'll have a US birth certificate that reflects that position, UK law applies its own law to legal parenthood, which means it doesn't recognize the position in the US. So therefore, we have this thing called the parental order, which is in place to kind of rectify this position. And essentially what it is, it's an application that you make to the family court post-birth. And the idea of this order, once it's been granted by the court, is that it reassigns parenthood away from your surrogate and her spouse if she's married, and reassigns it to the intended parents. Because without this parental order, the UK law is going to consider your surrogate and her spouse if she's married the legal parent. So the final result of this process is that you will receive a new UK birth certificate for your child that names you both as the legal parent. So that's the kind of end goal. So there's a bit of process and criteria that I'm going to talk you through. And Laura mentioned the Brilliant Beginnings pathway, and as part of this pathway, at NGA, we give legal advice to all of the Brilliant Beginnings clients right at the start, actually, to make sure that you can qualify, you meet the criteria for the order, or if not, look at the sort of alternative ways to resolve the parenthood issue. And there are different options of how we work with Brilliant Beginnings clients, and I'm happy to kind of talk that through at another time, but essentially there are different levels depending on if you really want NGA to kind of drive the whole process for you, or if you want us to take the initial steps for you, setting things up for you in the right way, and then sort of handing it over to you, and that's sort of a lower cost version. So I think those are in a lovely booklet, probably set out much clearer than I've just explained, that I think will be sent out to you all at the end. So definitely we're involved, or we're helping from the legal side. So the application, as it's an international surrogacy, is heard by a High Court judge, and the process is going to take between 4 to 12 months. And the reason there's such a big kind of gap there, it really depends on the kind of the level of legal service that you have involved. I told at the start I do this every day, so I'm just going to do it quicker than you. That's me being modest, but there are a lot of different factors involved, but by how long it can take. But I really hope it wouldn't take over 12 months. So kind of considering the criteria that the court look at in order to grant these, I'm just going to run through highlight the most important ones, the ones that I get probably the most questions on. So firstly, that there must be a genetic connection between at least one of the intended parents and the child. Secondly, at least one of the intended parents must be domiciled in the UK. Domicile is boring. I just say the legal side is boring. Kind of a legal concept that is something that you only really need to be sort of thinking about if you're kind of British and you live outside the UK, or if you're not born in the UK, and then we can kind of explore your domicile with you and check that out to make sure that you meet this criteria, and that's just one of you if you are two intended parents. Another kind of big criteria that the court is going to look at in order to grant you your parental order is that your surrogate, and if she's married, needs to consent to this order being granted, and that's done through a number of ways, mostly through kind of forms being signed. I think one of the scariest parts of the legal side revolves around the money that's been paid to your surrogate and to the agency, but I hope I can assure you that it is nothing to worry about. I want to be very clear in saying that it's not illegal for UK parents to engage in commercial surrogacy overseas, but as part of the parental order process, you do need to ask the court to authorise retrospectively what you have paid. So what this sort of means is that the court are interested, and you have to provide them with a breakdown of what's been paid. And this is that the court want to be reassured that everything was done sort of properly and above board. And this really comes back to what our other speakers have been highlighting about kind of working with organisations like Brilliant Beginnings, that just show that everything was done properly. And it's a much easier way if you do work with kind of these organisations to show the court this. So that's expenses. The final part of the criteria that I just want to pick up on, and the most important one for the court, is the welfare of the child is the court's most important consideration. And as part of this, you are allocated sort of a trained social worker as the process who will look into the welfare. It's quite a high level check, but they will meet with you, and look to write a report that forms part of the evidence to show the court that this order is in your child's best interests to be made. So that's kind of a whistle-stop tour of the criteria and the process of the parental order and what it does. I want to end by saying that if any of that criteria worries you or you don't meet it, that's what we're here for, to talk you through, and we can look at other ways of securing legal parenthood. I'm just going to check, Helen, because I feel like I did that very quickly. I had a lot to get through, so I think that's all I want to say for now. We can pick up anything else at the questions at the end.
Brilliant, thank you, Heidi. Yeah,
Thank you.
That are coming in, but I think they'll be good to cover off all at the end. We've got a number of things that people are looking at.
Okay, super.
Thank you. And last but not least, I'm really excited for you all to hear from Alyssa. Alyssa, as I said at the beginning, has a dual role with us at Brilliant Beginnings as a surrogate manager, helping women here in the UK think about surrogacy and become surrogates, but also is going to be supporting some of our teams who go across to the US. And of course, she has unique experience as Alyssa was a surrogate in the US and had a beautiful set of twins about 7 years ago to a French couple. And I mean, Alyssa is truly international because although she's in the States at the moment, her usual home at the moment is Japan. But for a period of time, she was here in the UK. And while she was here, she was a surrogate, a UK surrogate, and helped deliver a beautiful baby girl. And in between all of that, she finished her MBA. So yeah, when she's not on a plane or studying, then you know, you'll be lucky to catch her. Anyway, Alyssa, we'd love to hear your story in your words. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Helen. So obviously I'm American. I get around, thankful to my husband's job. He is in the armed forces in the US. And so that kind of has allowed us to travel. So after I had my first son, I had a friend who was really struggling with endometriosis, and it got to her 4th surgery to try and you know, clear everything up in her uterus to try and make it a more acceptable place for a baby to grow. And she was feeling really disheartened right before the surgery and had chatted a little bit with me about, you know, would it be weird to ask someone to be my surrogate? You know, what would people think of me? And I hadn't really thought about it before, but it kind of got the ball rolling to where I, you know, was immediately like, I will be your surrogate. This is great. You know, I give birth very easily. I'm healthy, I'm young. And then fortunately, she was able to have her own children. But it really got me thinking, well, if I could do this for her, why not someone else? So I joined up with an agency when I was living in California. And as Helen said, had a set of twins about 7 years ago now for a wonderful French couple. Shortly after I gave birth, we bought a house and thought we were going to spend the rest of our lives in California. So naturally, my husband got orders to the UK. And we had to pack up and leave in under 6 months. And that was certainly a surprise for us. But we absolutely loved our time in the UK. And once I was settled in, I turned to my husband and I said, let's do this again. And he was absolutely on board. But we were very confused by the difference in laws and didn't really understand why he was going to be on the birth certificate when he wasn't genetically related to this child. And very much kind of were shocked at like why the laws were not as progressive as, you know, the laws that we'd experienced in California. And we reached out to Brilliant Beginnings and they held our hand through the whole thing, thank goodness. And it kind of turned out that I had struggled a little bit more getting pregnant this past round in the US and ended up delivering a beautiful COVID baby just over a year ago. And then packed up and moved to Japan, where I currently live now. And unfortunately, surrogacy is illegal there. So I will not be able to do surrogacy on a 3rd continent. But fortunately, I've been able to kind of keep in contact with the parents of both surrogacies, actually. Something that initially surprised me. When I had originally signed up with the agency, I've been very much more kind of, you know, this is just, you know, a temporary, you know, acquaintanceship. You know, not that I don't love making friends, but you know, this is just to make a baby for someone. This isn't really to like make friends per se. But we ended up just getting on so well that when I was living in the UK, we had the opportunity to visit quite a bit. As the twins got older, we'd visit for all birthdays because they were just a hop across the channel, which was fantastic. And we actually grew quite close. So then when I got to Brilliant Beginnings, I was like, oh, well, you know, that was just a miracle. It'll never happen again, but Brilliant Beginnings is just amazing. And matched me again with just a wonderful couple who I am still in touch with. And they just sent over a very hilarious photo of this little 1-year-old toddling around trying to ride their poor dogs. So she's causing quite a lot of mischief, and it's brilliant to see. But it did shock me kind of that I expected more of kind of a transactional relationship, but really what I got was a much deeper friendship that just very much organically happened. And I feel very lucky. But I also kind of am very thankful that Brilliant Beginnings was there to, and my previous agency had been there to really help guide the match process and make sure that, you know, I was matched with parents that very much had the same ideals and had the same kind of vision for what the journey was going to be. And we were very hesitant at the beginning to kind of say, oh yes, you know, like we'll see each other, we'll write to each other, and such things. But it kind of just, it happened, and it was absolutely wonderful. And I'm happy to, of course, answer any questions you have about that. Thank you.
Thanks, Alyssa. I mean, I guess we'll move on to, we've got loads of other questions, but I've just got a really quick question for you, which I can't believe I've never asked. But in terms of your experience in the US and the UK, and, you know, notwithstanding the sort of very different legal process, what would you say was kind of the easiest parts of the US versus the easiest parts of the UK?
I would say
maybe that's more interesting.
So the easiest part about the US was absolutely the pre-birth order. You know, my husband and I weren't involved at all in anything other than, you know, we signed the contracts and we signed letting our lawyer kind of petition the courts before the babies were even born. And so, you know, the second that everything happened, you know, there was no question at all whose name was going on the birth certificate. It was great because they, the twins' parents, they weren't super sure on one of the twins' names, and they were being threatened with not being allowed to leave the hospital until they decided on something. And that was great that I didn't have that. So I was really excited that, you know, everything was super straightforward with the passports and everything, you know, birth certificate and everything. But something that I really liked about the UK was that everything was much closer. You know, I had to fly from California to Las Vegas for treatment. That was kind of a bit of a hike versus, you know, taking the train for an hour. And I didn't meet my IPs face to face until I was 37 weeks pregnant with the twins. We had done lots of Skype, lots of email, phone calls, of course, but it is a little bit different to not be face to face with them. And so, you know, being face to face and meeting them in person kind of during the match process was really nice. In the UK.
Amazing, wonderful, thank you. We have got a number of questions, and if anybody has got any more, please feel free to add them in. We'll start right at the beginning again around agencies, and we've got a question around an agency that is currently offering what's called a hybrid service called Extraordinary Conceptions. And the question is around what are the thoughts on that model. So essentially, where Extraordinary Conceptions, which is a US-based agency, are offering are matching UK-based intended parents with surrogates who are US-based, will give birth in the US, but will come over to the UK for embryo transfer. So embryos can be created here, and then they will fly back. How to make a complex process more complicated is something. And we have limited experience, but Laura, do you want to pick that up in terms of what our thoughts are on this model versus a full US surrogacy where everything is done in the US?
Yeah, of course, Helen. So, you know, it is a new model, as Helen said, and it's something that we, you know, during the pandemic felt like it was, you know, a good way forward. It potentially enabled UK intended parents to create their embryos here and have the option for a surrogate to travel out for transfer. I think in reality, there are things that need to be thought about with that model in terms of things like surrogate visas and the travel restrictions. But also the fact that, you know, at the moment, we don't have that first-hand lived experience of what that type of journey looks like from start to finish. So it's really hard to say, you know, do we feel that it's a positive route forward? Because right now, actually, we don't have that lived experience. We are supporting people through the journey. So maybe in a year's time, we'd be able to give a little bit more feedback on that.
And I guess the first question is, you know, why would you? Yeah.
Well, if I may, you know, we've had experience over the last couple of years with doing basically, instead of the surrogate traveling, we have the embryos travel. Mm-hmm. So embryos that were created in the UK that are shipped to the US, and the transfer happens here with a US surrogate. And that process is actually, you know, is pretty simple, pretty straightforward, probably less expensive than shipping the surrogate over there, and less likely, like as Laura said, less likely to be affected by the travel restrictions, because we have no trouble actually shipping embryo sperm both ways. We actually just ship some sperm to London, and we receive embryos a few times in the past year from the UK. So I think that model is interesting. I'm not sure. I have no experience with that, but I think there is definitely some issues that can come up.
Yeah. And Dr. Levy, in terms of then the process for bringing embryos from the UK to the US,
yes,
my understanding is obviously there's an FDA waiver that needs to be applied for. How does that work? Or and you know, roughly kind of time frames for that to happen? How would that?
Well, it's actually a lot simpler than most people think. Mm-hmm. You know, so we work with a company, actually a few companies that are basically specialized in transporting biological material. So it's very safe. The embryos, of course, are frozen and kept in liquid nitrogen. And there is a courier that basically picks up the embryos and delivers them to our clinic. The cost varies varies with the company, but it's probably, I would say, roughly about $2,000 or $3,000. Okay. As far as all the regulatory issues, we work directly with the clinic, the sending clinic, and make sure that all the paperwork has been done, and usually it has been done. If there's certain things that need to be added that are required in the US for surrogacy, we make sure that it's done. And again, that can be done remotely. So for example, there is certain blood work that is required of the parents when you use a surrogate. It has to be done in an American FDA laboratory. So we will send you a kit, you take your bloods and you send them back to us. So it's actually a lot, like I said, it's a lot simpler than most people think.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Anita, I think you asked that question. If there's any other particular questions, very happy to loop you in with Dr. Lavy, who might be able to give you a little bit more information on your specific scenarios. Okay, so just sticking with agencies for a minute, we've got a question around large versus small, boutique versus experience, non-experience, and I guess again this is maybe a question for Laura and Dr. Lavy and maybe Alyssa as well, because you've had a bit of a broad experience. So is there any particular value in going with a large or a small, more experience, less experience? Dr. Lavy, do you want to start with that?
Sure. So I think, my experience, I mean, we have certain criteria, and I didn't have time to get into exactly what the medical requirements for surrogacy, such as the fact that in order to become a surrogate, you have to have your own children, and you have had normal pregnancies and uncomplicated deliveries. There's certain requirement as far as age, there's a requirement as far as BMI, but I think that, I personally, the more I do this, the more I realize that you have to look at individuals. And we have surrogates that are a little older, a little younger, a little heavier, that are just great based on their history. So for each and every surrogate, before she is medically approved to be a surrogate, we gather all their medical information. We actually contact her OBGYN physician and get their clearance, their blessing. And the same is true for experience versus first time. I think that, we don't find any difference in the success. I think it's more really about the proper match, making sure you find someone that you're comfortable with. And I think the more restrictions or the more requirements you have, it will just take longer. And there's no advantage. This holds true for egg donors as well. You can have an egg donor that has donated before, but it doesn't really mean that you'll have a better result than if you choose an egg donor that's never donated.
Brilliant, thank you. Laura?
Thank you. So in terms of the agencies' size and kind of their span across the US, I think we see there is a place for everyone, and it can be quite small and boutique, it can be quite vast, but the key thing really is finding somebody and an organisation that you're comfortable with. So when we get to know you, we'll get to know how you like to communicate with people, what you feel most comfortable with, how you want this journey to look. And from that, we will introduce you to the people that we've got good connections with. We've made, lots of established journeys with them already. And you will have chance to kind of meet the teams themselves and from then make your choice. So in terms of big difference, it really is an individual choice. And as kind of Dr. Lavy said, the wait time really does depend on what you are looking for from a surrogate as well. So that's always kind of something to consider and think about.
And I guess part of the last bit of that question is there any risk to a smaller, more boutique, newer agency? What would be the risk to go down that route?
Well, I mean, that's sort of it's a difficult question to answer, because as I said, there's many agencies in the US, over 200 last count. I would say that if you look at the number of surrogacies that are done in the US, the vast majority are done by probably the top 10 or 15 agencies. So, and I try to be very careful with the agencies that I work with. because, you know, again, it's a big responsibility. Many of the agencies, and unfortunately in the US, does not have any requirements for registering, or there's no regulation on those agencies. So we sort of have to do our own and vet the agencies as we go. So I, you know, last time we checked, I probably work with about 10 agencies. And these are agencies that I trust and I know well, reputable, have been around for a while. And they basically take care of all the things that, you know, Laura mentioned and Heidi mentioned, you know, the finding a good surrogate, having good support in the process, having a good legal support as well. So you have to be really careful. And certainly, I mean, of course, you don't want to pay the top price, but you don't want to go with the cheapest agencies, because those are usually not the ones that are the most reputable.
Wonderful. Alyssa, have you got anything that you want to add to that? You're muted. You're muted.
Just to reiterate that, you know, I think Bringing Beginnings does a really good job of, you know, taking the time to talk to potential intended parents and match them, you know, with a clinic that they are and an agency that they're gonna get on with, and that kind of really matches the style and the same types of wants and needs, so that, you know, everyone has a good journey.
Yeah, I think, yeah, it is about finding the agency that works best for you, but also, you know, testing the track record a little bit.
Yep.
Yeah, so a newer one doesn't mean to say, you know, that they don't have the experience, because they may well have that behind the scenes in different ways. Okay, I think that kind of covers the agency side of questions. We've got another question around costs and about how the costs are phased. For example, embryo transfer, if you pay almost as first transfer happens, then a second transfer. But probably, Laura, it's quite helpful to kind of break down the full scale of the costs. And then Dr. Lavy, if you're happy to talk around the clinical costs, that would be great. Laura?
Yeah, great. So when you first kind of start the process, and we've done all those introductions to your agencies that you've chosen to work with, there'll be some initial upfront costs that you have to pay to your agency to kind of secure their services in order for them to help you find a match with your surrogate. You'll have some initial upfront costs for potentially an egg donor agency if you're going down the egg donor route. And then the first thing normally will be to pay for your egg donor and their compensation. And alongside that come your clinic costs as well, because obviously your clinic comes into that fairly swiftly in creating your embryos. Normally there is trust accounts with the agency that you fund, and then the agencies then pay out the donor compensation and the surrogate compensation as and when is needed for clinic appointments or the medical workup potentially, and then at the relevant times your attorneys are looped in the process when you get to the agreement phases. So I think the question there from Zavi around about are the costs phased? I think there's quite an initial jump, so you're going to have to fund a few trust accounts right at the start, and then kind of top those up along the process as you go. So it's quite important that you have a fair chunk of that budget available at the start, because it's going to be needed fairly quickly, really.
Wonderful. And Dr. Lavy, in terms of the clinical phasing?
Well, I mean, I can't speak to the exact cost, but I can say that, you know, the medical part of the process, the cost is fairly fixed. I mean, we can basically tell you ahead of time how much the whole thing will cost. I think on the surrogacy end, it's a little bit more variable because it depends on the agency and the agency fee and the surrogate and how much, what compensation she has. And and of course, it depends on what exactly you need. You need an egg donor, you need a surrogate, you need both. Usually when we have our first meeting, I sort of find out exactly what your needs are. And then I have my finance manager call and explain exactly the cost. We have different packages, for lack of a better word, where we, for example, we have a package where you have all the embryos that were created are transferred and basically for the same cost. So we try to make it, because I think what part of the stress that we find with this process is the parents go into it not knowing what ultimately they will need to spend, and that creates a lot of anxiety. So we try, at least from our end, to make it very clear, very simple.
Wonderful, thank you. Okay, we'll now move on to, got some legal questions, Heidi. So we'll start off kind of with the US side, and after baby is born and the process for applying for a US passport, how long do parents and baby need to be in the States post-birth before they can travel home?
I would say on average, we probably see about 6 weeks, I would say, from birth to flight home. That all got thrown out the window during the pandemic. Pretty much overnight, the US passport office closed its doors and wasn't accepting new applications. And like I said, that was what we were routinely advising parents to do, was to apply for this US passport for their newborn. And that kind of threw a spanner in the works, and we had a lot of our parents kind of turn around and say, well, what do we do now? So we created a kind of a way through. Essentially, we honestly just butted our heads together and thought, right, well, what can we do? How can we get these parents and their newborns home during quite a stressful time? And we created sort of a process working with the UK Home Office and the UK Passport Office to enable parents to apply for emergency travel documents or kind of emergency passports for their newborns to be able to kind of rush home. And this was a process. Some of these babies aren't British at this point, and there are lots of things that go into babies' nationality that some won't be born British, and we had to expedite that process to make it was a whole fanfare, Helen, but we managed to pass. So people weren't stuck out there for too long, even with the US passport office closed. I hope something like that never happens again, but I feel like very prepared. I don't know what could happen that we wouldn't be able to kind of step up and look after, take care of our clients and get everyone home as soon as possible. I hope that answers the question.
Brilliant. And then after people come home and applying for the parental order, and you mentioned that time frame of up to 12 months, could be shorter for the parental order to be granted. What happens in terms of the UK systems, and I guess particularly around if there's a need to go to the hospital, doctor's appointments, that kind of thing? Do the UK system recognize that process, and is there any complications that anyone has seen around that?
Yeah, good question. I'd say it's slightly a grey area. I think the key thing to remember is that you will have sort of the US birth certificate that will be naming you as the parent. So there is that. One of the things that we put in place for parents that are working with Brilliant Beginnings, for example, is if we just write a letter primarily to the kind of UK border forces as your first entry point to the UK system, just to kind of smooth over any concerns that might happen there, as it's a little bit unusual to have sort of a US passport if neither parent is a US citizen and traveling on that passport. So that's sort of step one that we routinely put in place. I think my advice would be that most sort of GPs, especially if they've been sort of informed that you're pregnant and so they're sort of expecting it, are pragmatic to the situation. But if there's any kind of any pushback or difficulty, then you know, we'll look after you, or we'll get involved, and we're happy to sort of explain the legal position and the child's reality and sort of smooth things over.
I've got to say, on a practical level, I think it's sensible just to think that, you know, surrogacy is certainly well on the map here in the UK. We don't typically hear of GPs or any of the medical profession pushing back. And, you know, actually most people are just super excited that there's a baby that they can have something to do with. So hopefully that shouldn't be a worry. It is just a factor of, you know, an archaic legal system. But I think thankfully the Law Commission, the Department of Health, they've all issued guidance. And so it's generally very, very supportive. So hopefully you can put at the back of your head.
I agree. And I think that the real kind of benefit of going to the US as well is it's such a common surrogacy destinations that, you know, the High Court is very familiar with dealing with US surrogacy cases. And, you know, we've heard about the level of professionalism going on there. So it doesn't really tend to cause too many raised eyebrows.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Now, Alyssa, a question for you. That obviously we loved hearing your story, and loved that you've got such a wonderful relationship with your IPs. Do you feel parentally attached to the babies at all that you gave birth to? And I guess, Laura, this is a good question for you as well. How do you guys feel about the babies?
We get this a lot. You know, like, how do you give up your baby? Well, it's not my baby. I went into this to get you a family. You know, I'm super not into baby kidnapping. Also, my boys would be very upset with me. You know, I completed my family, and now I'm just, you know, set out to helping others complete theirs. You know, I feel for them as I do for, you know, maybe my nieces and nephews or my friends' children. We just kind of settled on me being, you know, Auntie Alyssa for my two surrogacies, but you know, other surrogates, you know, choose a different name, or other parents choose a different name for their surrogate. And yeah, I just can't, I do love them, but I certainly, you know, it's a very different love than, you know, I have for my children.
Yeah, I'll just absolutely echo everything that Alyssa's just said. Yeah, to all of the surrogate babies that I've had, and there's 4 to date.
8.
That 4, yeah, I know. Well, Helen, 4 to date. And yeah, I'm Auntie Laura to them, and I see them just like, yeah, like Alyssa said, my nieces or nephews or my friends' children. And it isn't a maternal love. It definitely isn't. The love that I have is for the intended parents, really. They're my friends and my confidants. So yeah, there isn't an attachment in that way at all. No, not at all.
We often hear surrogates saying they're just giving back the babies. You know, they've been holding them for a few months, now they're giving them back. So, yeah, wonderful, thank you. Okay, so here is a question around, it's more clinical questions again, we're on to that. So if a man is 53 and healthy, should his sperm quality still be good enough to fertilize an egg? Dr. Levy. It's a very broad question, I know. Oh, you're muted, Dr. Levy. You're muted.
Sorry, the simple answer is yes, should be okay. So, of course, there's a very big difference in the reduction in fertility with age between men and women. So for women, of course, they have a limited number of eggs. They have all their eggs when they're born. And when a woman gets into her late 30s, early 40s, she has fewer eggs left, and the quality of the eggs is not as good, and therefore it becomes more difficult to get pregnant and higher risk of miscarriage, birth defects, and so forth. For men, actually continually produce sperm pretty much throughout their lifetime. So there's almost always sperm for someone who doesn't have any issues, any medical issues. The question about, the children of older dads and whether they have any medical issues, developmental issues, and so forth is still an open question. Because there seems to be for children of much older dads, and 53 is not old, there is some concern or some evidence that the children have a higher incidence of attention deficit disorder, autism, and things like that. But again, it's not so obvious. It's a little bit difficult to be sure. But certainly for someone in their 40s and 50s, I don't think it's an issue.
Wonderful, thank you. And then Xavier asked another question about embryos being shipped, and do they get lost? And if so, what are the chances of them being lost?
Well, I can say that, we've been working with embryos and eggs and sperm that are being shipped from us and to us for many years. Never lost an embryo. So, and of course, again, it's like everything else, you need to be sure that you're working with the right people. I mean, there are certain quality controls that they have to maintain. There's these tanks that have continuous temperature monitoring. And most importantly, the courier actually hand carries. So basically the tank doesn't leave their hands from the time they pick up the tank at the sending clinic until it reaches us. So, and that's what they do every day. So yeah, of course, if you, some people actually say, well, can I deliver my own embryos? I probably wouldn't do that. I wouldn't advise it. But if you work with a reputable, experienced company, then it really doesn't happen.
Yeah, I don't think, Laura, we haven't had any experience of embryos being lost.
No, we haven't.
No, so that's good news. Okay, there's a couple of other more general questions, might be easier if I answer them. One is, are we thinking about doing a UK pathway session in the near future? And yes is the short answer. When, you might ask, probably not until the autumn now. But certainly we'll keep everyone posted who might be interested. Question around clinics in Africa. Unfortunately, no, we don't have any experience of working with clinics in Africa. I don't know whether Dr. Lavy, if you have any experience at all.
I don't. I have clients that have traveled from Africa, but I don't work with any clinics in Africa.
Yeah, sorry. And less expensive options than the UK whilst maintaining the quality. I would say that, the US surrogacy has been around for, 20 to 30 years, and really has driven the global surrogacy market. I think there's phenomenal experience, plus the backing of the legal process. And so I would say there is not a like-for-like comparison. Maybe in 30 years to come, the UK will have, an ounce of the experience that the US has, but unless anyone else can tell me otherwise, I think, without doubt, the US is a gold standard. Well, I really appreciate this has gone on a little bit longer than we had planned, and I appreciate you staying on. I really, really appreciate all of the speakers here staying and answering all of our questions. and what I feel is just a really incredibly helpful topic. Laura, thank you for giving up your evening. Dr. Levy, thank you for taking time out of your clinic, your valuable clinic time, and helping us. Heidi and Alyssa, very, very grateful for your time. And Alyssa, I know this is full time with your kids, so thank you. Thank you all very, very much. And any questions, let Jess know, and we'll happily send on any queries to any of our speakers. Have a lovely, lovely evening and stay safe.